Welcome to Lore of the Ring. In Part 1, we explored the dark, dangerous paths of Mirkwood and the shadow of Dol Guldur. Now, in Part 2, we uncover the fortress's secrets and the rise of the necromancer. Those who must cross it do so knowing they may not emerge. They prepare as best they can, carrying weapons and provisions, traveling in groups, moving as quickly as stealth allows. They mark their paths with whatever means they can devise, though such marks often disappear or mislead. They sleep in shifts, always with guards posted, always aware that rest is when the predators prefer to strike. Some seek to avoid the forest entirely, traveling around its borders, a journey that adds weeks to any trip, that crosses lands nearly as dangerous in their own ways. But for those who cannot afford the time, for those who have no choice but to take the direct route, the forest waits with its twisted paths and patient horrors. And so Mirkwood stands as a boundary and a test. Those who pass through it are changed by the experience, marked by the memory of that oppressive darkness, that constant dread. They carry the forest with them afterward, in nightmares, in sudden starts at shadows, in a wariness that never quite fades. The paths through the mist lead everywhere and nowhere. They promise passage, but deliver only struggle. They are the arteries of a dying land, carrying not lifeblood, but poison through the body of what was once a paradise. And the forest watches every step, patient and hungry, waiting for the inevitable moment when vigilance fails, when exhaustion wins, when another set of bones joins the countless others moldering beneath the leaves. There is a place in Mirkwood where the shadow gathers so thickly that it seems to have substance, where the very air presses down with malevolent weight. A place where no bird sings, where no deer venture, where even the spiders grow nervous and the wolves hunt elsewhere. A rocky hill that rises from the forest floor like a broken fang, bare of all vegetation save thorny scrub and sickly moss. Dol Guldur, the hill of sorcery, the shadow's heart. This fortress stands in the southern reaches of the forest, and from its towers, broken and rebuilt over long ages, a presence extends its will-like fingers of frost creeping across water. The stones of Dol Guldur are ancient beyond reckoning, dating to the Second Age or perhaps even earlier, remnants of some forgotten stronghold built when different powers walked Middle-earth. But those original builders, whoever they might have been, could not have imagined what their creation would become. Around the year 1000 of the Third Age, a power came to this place. At first, it was subtle, a feeling of unease that settled over the region, a sense that something watchful had taken residence in the old ruins. The elves noticed but did not yet understand the magnitude of what had occurred. They called this presence the necromancer, believing it to be some lesser evil, a sorcerer or dark spirit seeking refuge in the abandoned fortress. They could not have been more wrong. The necromancer was Sauron himself, returned from the defeat that had ended the Second Age, regaining his strength in secret while the peoples of Middle-earth believed him destroyed. He chose Dol Guldur with deliberate care, central to the continent, in a forest vast enough to hide his presence, close enough to influence events but remote enough to avoid immediate discovery. From this stronghold, he could begin rebuilding his power, gathering servants, extending his influence. And extend it he did. The fortress grew over the centuries, not through conventional construction but through dark arts. The stones themselves seemed to multiply, crawling upward and outward like living things, forming new towers and walls. The structure became a maze of passages and chambers, some built by hands, others seemingly formed by the will of the master himself, corridors that led nowhere, stairs that climbed into darkness, dungeons that descended far below the level of the forest floor, deep into the roots of the earth. Within these walls, horrors were created and refined. Sauron, ever the servant of Morgoth in the elder days, had learned much of the corruption of living things. He practiced those arts here, twisting creatures into new and terrible forms. The spiders that plagued the forest may have come from ancient stock, descendants of Ungoliant's brood, but it was in Dol Guldur that they were bred deliberately, made larger and more intelligent, and released into the forest to spread chaos and fear. The wolves, too, were subject to his manipulations. Captured specimens were brought to the fortress, exposed to sorceries that warped their forms and minds, then released to breed with the wild packs, spreading their corruption through each new generation. In this way, Sauron made the forest itself into a weapon, turning the natural inhabitants into his unwitting servants. But the fortress served darker purposes still. It was a place of imprisonment and torment, where enemies of the shadow were brought to be broken. The dungeons beneath Dol Guldur rang with screams that were thankfully muffled by thick stone and distance. Here, Sauron extracted information through means both physical and psychological, wielding fear as precisely as any torturer's blade. Many who entered those dungeons never emerged. Those who did were changed, their wills bent, their loyalties reversed, sent back into the world as spies and servants of the darkness. It was to Dol Guldur that Thrain, father of Thorin Oakenshield, was brought after being captured on the road. The last of the 7 rings given to the dwarf lords, which he had carried in secret, was taken from him there. And though the wizard Gandalf would eventually find him and attempt rescue, Thrain died of his torments before he could be freed, his mind broken by what he had endured. The fortress served also as a gathering place for evil things. Orcs came here, drawn by the power that radiated from its towers. They did not dwell in the forest. The spiders and wolves would have seen to that, but they traveled to and from Dol Guldur, carrying messages, receiving orders, then departing to spread chaos elsewhere. Later, when the shadow grew bold enough, larger forces would gather here, preparing for war. From Dol Guldur, Sauron coordinated his efforts across Middle-earth. His mind, vast and terrible, reached out through dark channels to his servants scattered across the continent. He gathered intelligence, manipulated events, laid plans within plans. He orchestrated the movements of orcs in the Misty Mountains, influenced the dragons far to the north, sowed discord among the free peoples, all while maintaining the pretense of being merely the necromancer, a lesser evil, not worth the combined attention of the wise. But some suspected. Gandalf the Grey, wandering Middle-earth and noting the growing darkness, became convinced that the necromancer was more than he appeared. The wizard ventured to Dol Guldur not once but twice, seeking to pierce the shadows and discover the truth. On his first visit, he found only evidence of great evil, not proof of identity. But his second journey, many centuries later, would finally reveal what dwelt in the fortress, and the discovery would change everything. The White Council, that gathering of the wise including Gandalf, Saruman, Galadriel, and Elrond, debated for years what should be done about Dol Guldur. Some, including Gandalf, urged immediate action, an assault to drive out the evil before it grew too strong. But Saruman counseled patience and delay, arguing that they did not yet have the strength to face such power. What Saruman did not reveal was his own secret desire. He hoped to find the One Ring for himself, and he believed that if Sauron remained weak and hidden, the ring might yet reveal itself and be claimed by another. So the years passed, and Dol Guldur grew in power while the wise debated. The fortress expanded, its influence spread, and the shadow over Mirkwood deepened year by year. The southern regions of the forest became utterly impassable, corrupted beyond hope of restoration. The pollution advanced northward, creeping toward the elven realm like a slow tide of poison. The very stones of Dol Guldur seemed to absorb and radiate evil. The fortress appeared different depending on who looked upon it, and when sometimes a ruin, broken and abandoned, other times a mighty stronghold with towers reaching toward the perpetually overcast sky. This was part of its power, the ability to deceive and conceal, to seem less threatening than it truly was until suddenly it was too late, and the full force of its master's wrath descended. Around the fortress, nothing wholesome could grow. The earth itself had been poisoned by the long presence of evil, saturated with it until the corruption went down to the bedrock. The thorns that grew here were particularly vicious, armed with spines that seemed to seek out flesh deliberately. The pools that collected in rocky depressions were black and oily, and things moved in their depths that had no natural form. Lights could sometimes be seen atop the highest towers, sickly greens and corpse blues, the colors of decay and wrongness. What rituals were performed beneath those lights, what dark ceremonies conducted, only Sauron and his most trusted servants knew. But those lights were visible for miles, a constant reminder to all who dwelt in the forest that the shadow had a heart, a center, a source. The elves mounted what attacks they could against Dol Guldur, but their forces were insufficient to truly threaten it. Patrols that ventured too close often did not return. Those that did reported impossible defenses, walls that seemed to shift, passages that led in circles, guardians both physical and spectral that appeared without warning. Thranduil recognized the futility of direct assault and instead focused on containment, establishing a distant cordon, watching for any major movements of forces. And yet, in the heart of shadow, a faint spark of hope flickered, hidden among the leaves. For all Sauron's power, for all his carefully laid plans, he had made one critical error. He had revealed himself too soon, rebuilt his strength in a place that could be found, allowed evidence of his presence to accumulate. When the time came, when circumstances finally aligned and the White Council could delay no longer, they would come to Dol Guldur in force and drive him out. It would not be his final defeat, far from it. He would retreat to his true stronghold in Mordor and begin preparing for open war. But the assault on Dol Guldur would mark the end of his hidden phase, the conclusion of centuries of secret manipulation. And for a time, however brief, the shadow's grip on Mirkwood would loosen. But that time lay in the future. For now, Dol Guldur stands as the fortress of shadows, the heart of evil in the forest, the source from which corruption flows like water from a poisoned spring. It is the reason Mirkwood wears its name, the cause of the forest's transformation from paradise to nightmare. And within its walls, the Dark Lord bides his time, spinning his webs, gathering his strength, preparing for the day when he will emerge from hiding and cast his shadow across all of Middle-earth. The fortress waits. The shadow endures. And the forest suffers under its master's malevolent gaze. There comes a moment in every long darkness when the tide finally turns. Not with fanfare, not with certainty, but with a single act of defiance that changes everything. For Mirkwood, that moment came in the year 2941 of the Third Age, when the White Council at last chose to act. The wait had been long, too long, many would later say. Centuries had passed since Gandalf first urged action against Dol Guldur, centuries during which the shadow deepened and spread, during which countless lives were lost to the forest's corruption. But the wise move slowly, bound by caution and the weight of their long memories. They remember past failures, past presumptions that led to catastrophe. They debate and deliberate, weighing every possibility, calculating every risk. But by 2941, the evidence had become impossible to ignore. The necromancer was no longer content to remain hidden. His forces were growing bold, moving openly. Orcs raided with increasing frequency. The shadow was spreading beyond Mirkwood's borders, reaching into the surrounding lands. And Gandalf had finally penetrated the deceptions, had confirmed what he had long suspected, that the necromancer and Sauron were one and the same, that the Dark Lord had returned and was rebuilding his power in the heart of Middle-earth. Even Saruman, who had counseled delay for so long, could no longer argue for inaction. The White Council assembled, wizards and elves, the bearers of the 3 elven rings, the greatest powers remaining in Middle-earth, and they turned their combined might toward Dol Guldur. What transpired there is recorded only in fragments, in hints and brief mentions scattered through the histories. The assault itself was not a battle in the traditional sense. No armies clashed. No siege engines hurled stones at walls. This was a confrontation of powers, of wills clashing in realms beyond the physical. The wizards and elven lords brought their full strength to bear, wielding arts and abilities that had not been unleashed since the ancient wars of earlier ages. The very stones of Dol Guldur shook. The towers that had stood for centuries cracked and crumbled. The enchantments that protected the fortress, woven over long years, layer upon layer of shadow and deception, were stripped away one by one. Light, true light, pierced the darkness for the first time in a millennium, and the servants of the shadow fled before it, shrieking. Sauron himself departed. He was not yet strong enough to face the combined might of the White Council, not ready to reveal his full power. His plans required more time, more preparation. So he abandoned Dol Guldur, retreating to Mordor, to the fortress of Barad-dûr, which he had begun rebuilding in secret. He left behind ruin and emptiness, a hollow victory for those who had driven him out, for they knew, even in the moment of triumph, that they had not destroyed him, only displaced him, and that he would return stronger than before. But for Mirkwood, the departure of its dark master brought immediate relief. The oppressive weight that had pressed down on the forest for so long lifted, not entirely, but noticeably. It was as if the land itself could breathe again, could begin the long process of healing. The change was most apparent in the southern reaches, nearest to Dol Guldur itself. Here, where the corruption had been most intense, where the very earth had been poisoned by centuries of evil presence, the transformation began almost at once. Trees that had been twisted and blackened started to straighten, to send out new growth. The thorns that had choked every path began to wither and die back. Springs that had run black and foul gradually cleared, their waters returning to something approaching purity. The creatures of darkness retreated. The spiders, deprived of their master's driving will, withdrew to the deepest parts of the forest, their numbers diminishing as the elves pressed their advantage, hunting them with renewed vigor. The wolves grew less organized, reverting to more natural patterns of behavior, still dangerous but no longer possessed of that eerie intelligence that had made them so deadly. The bats fled to distant caves, and the shadow things, whatever they had been, dissipated like morning mist. The elves of the woodland realm emerged from their fortress with cautious hope. Thranduil ordered patrols to range farther than they had in centuries, to explore regions that had been abandoned for generations. His people found devastation, yes, vast tracts of forest so damaged that they might never fully recover. But they also found resilience. They found seeds germinating in clearings where sunlight now reached the forest floor. They found saplings pushing up through the debris. They found life reasserting itself with the stubborn determination that characterizes all growing things. King Thranduil himself walked in the southern forest for the first time in living memory. He stood in a clearing not far from the ruins of Dol Guldur and felt the sun on his face, weak and filtered through lingering haze, but present nonetheless. And he allowed himself to believe, for a moment, that perhaps the worst had passed, that perhaps his people might one day reclaim all that had been lost. The forest river ran clear again, its waters gradually purging themselves of the corruption they had carried for so long. Fish returned to its depths, not immediately, but year by year, migrating upstream from the Anduin, reclaiming their ancestral spawning grounds. The riverbanks, once choked with thorns and poisoned vegetation, began to bloom with wildflowers. Willows that had stood bare and skeletal for decades sent out new leaves, their branches trailing in the current as they had in ages past. The old forest road, though still overgrown and difficult to navigate, became passable again. Travelers, still few and still cautious, found they could make the crossing without the near certainty of death that had characterized earlier attempts. The path no longer seemed to twist back on itself, no longer led in circles. The enchantments that had made it a trap were lifting, slowly dissolving like ice in spring sunlight. In the north, where the shadow had never fully penetrated, the change was even more dramatic. The forests here, which had remained relatively untouched but still diminished, suddenly flourished with renewed vigor. Trees that had grown stunted and slow shot upward in growth spurts that amazed even the long-lived elves. The canopy thinned enough that sunlight reached the forest floor in abundance, and the undergrowth transformed from an obstacle into a garden. Ferns and flowers, berries and healing herbs, all the diversity that had been suppressed by the shadow's presence. The animals returned. Deer were spotted in herds not seen for centuries, grazing in meadows that had been reclaimed from the darkness. Elk, massive and magnificent, their antlers spreading like bare branches, moved through the forest with stately confidence. Songbirds, robins and thrushes, nightingales and larks, filled the air with music that had been absent for so long that it brought tears to the eyes of elves who had never thought to hear such sounds again. But healing is not the same as restoration. The scars remained, and some would never fully fade. The southern regions, though recovering, bore the marks of their long corruption. Trees grew there now, yes, but they were twisted in subtle ways, their bark patterns forming shapes that disturbed the eye, their branches reaching at angles that defied natural growth. The earth itself retained a taint, a slight bitterness to water drawn from wells, a reluctance in seeds to germinate, a sense that something essential had been leached away and might never fully return. There were places, clearings and hollows, where nothing would grow at all. The corruption had penetrated so deeply that the land itself had died, poisoned beyond any healing that the present age could provide. These dead zones remained as monuments to what had been endured, as warnings of how close the forest had come to complete destruction. The elves marked these places with stones and avoided them, leaving them to whatever process of purification only the passage of ages might provide. and the forest remembered. Trees live long, and their memories are deep. The oaks and beeches that had witnessed the shadows rise did not forget simply because it had retreated. They carried those memories in their rings, in their roots, in the very substance of their wood. When storms came, when the wind blew hard from the south, the trees would groan and creak with voices that seemed to speak of sorrow and suffering, of ages endured in darkness, of patience tested beyond all reasonable limits. The elves, too, remembered. Thranduil ruled with the knowledge that the shadow could return. That vigilance remained necessary even in these brighter days. He did not abandon the underground fortress, did not allow his people to grow complacent. The patrols continued, the watches were maintained. For he knew, as all the wise knew, that Sauron had not been destroyed, only driven out. The enemy had merely changed location, and the war was far from over. Indeed, even as Mirkwood breathed its first breaths of recovery, darkness was gathering in the east. In Mordor, Sauron was openly revealing himself now, no longer hiding behind the pretense of the necromancer. He was gathering his armies, forging weapons, building the forces that would soon spill out of the Black Land to engulf the world in war. The respite granted to Mirkwood was temporary, a brief pause before the storm that would sweep across Middle-earth. Still, for a time, a few precious years, the forest knew something approaching peace. The elves sang songs they had not sung in centuries, songs of celebration and joy rather than lament. They danced in the clearings under moon and stars, reconnecting with traditions that had been suspended during the long years of siege. They opened their borders slightly, cautiously, allowing trusted allies to visit, to see that the woodland realm had survived and endured. King Thranduil even, in a gesture that would have been unthinkable a decade earlier, sent envoys to the men of Dale and the dwarves of Erebor. The Battle of Five Armies, fought in 2941, the same year as the assault on Dol Guldur, had forged unexpected alliances, had reminded all the free peoples that they shared common enemies and common interests. The enmity between elf and dwarf, though ancient and deep, had been tempered by shared sacrifice. New relationships were cautiously explored, new trade arrangements negotiated. The forest was healing, and so too, perhaps, were the divisions that had weakened the free peoples for so long. But the forest never forgot what it had been, what it had endured. On certain nights, when the moon was dark and the wind blew from the south, the shadows would seem to deepen and gather. Travelers would report hearing voices in the distance, seeing lights where no lights should be. The giant spiders, though reduced in number, were not extinct. They still lurked in the deep places, still wove their webs and hunted their prey. The wolves, though less organized, still posed danger to the unwary. Mirkwood wore its scars like badges of survival. It was no longer the pristine paradise of the elder days, no longer Greenwood the Great in anything but memory. But it lived, it breathed, it endured. And in that endurance was its own kind of victory, a testament to the resilience of life, to the stubborn refusal of living things to surrender entirely to darkness. The elves planted new trees, saplings grown from seeds preserved through all the dark years, descendant of the ancient forests of Beleriand. They nurtured these young trees with songs and care, imbuing them with hope for a future where the forest might once again deserve its old name. The work would take centuries, would outlast the lives of men, would stretch beyond the reckoning of all but the elves themselves. But they had time, and they had will, and they had survived worse. And so Mirkwood entered a new age, not restored but recovering, Not pure, but purged of its worst corruption. Not paradise regained, but a realm where hope had returned after its long exile, where the future held possibility rather than only dread. The light that remained was not the light that had been lost. It was dimmer, harder one, tinged with the memory of darkness. But it was light nonetheless, real and growing stronger with each passing season. And if you listened closely, in the quiet hours between night and dawn, you could hear the forest singing, softly, tentatively, like a voice long silent learning again to speak. It sang of what had been endured and what had been survived. It sang of roots going deep and branches reaching high. It sang of the eternal cycle, growth and decay, death and rebirth, shadow and light in their endless dance. The forest remembered, but the forest also hoped. And in that hope lay the promise of genuine restoration, however distant it might be. Yet even now, even with the shadow's retreat and the beginnings of healing, there were those who knew the truth. The forest would never again be what it was. Some wounds go too deep, leave marks that persist beyond any healing. Mirkwood would always bear the memory of its dark age, would always carry within it the potential to slip back into shadow should vigilance fail. But perhaps that was not entirely a tragedy. Perhaps in surviving its corruption, in bearing witness to darkness and yet refusing to surrender, the forest had gained something as well as lost. It had become a symbol of endurance, of resilience, of the refusal to yield even when all seems lost. The elves understood this. They were the ancient people, the firstborn, and they knew that all things in Middle-earth were tinged with sorrow, that every joy carried the seed of its eventual loss. They did not expect paradise to return. They worked toward healing knowing it would never be complete, fought for survival knowing the struggle would never truly end. And they found beauty in that truth. Beauty in the new growth pushing through scarred earth. Beauty in the rivers running clear again after running foul for so long. Beauty in the simple fact of survival, of having endured when so many times it seemed endurance was impossible. Mirkwood lived. That alone was victory enough. But the forest remembers, its shadows never fully fade. And in the deep places, in the oldest trees and the secret hollows, the memory of what was endured persists. It whispers to those who can hear, telling them stories of suffering and survival, warning them that darkness once invited is never fully banished, reminding them that the price of light is eternal vigilance. The forest endures, changed but unbroken, and it waits, patient as only trees can be patient, to see what the turning ages will bring. To understand Mirkwood is to understand something essential about Tolkien himself, about his relationship with the wild wood, about the myths and symbols that shaped his imagination, about the deeper truths he sought to explore through the medium of fantasy. Forests appear throughout Tolkien's legendarium, and each carries its own character, its own significance. There is Lothlorien, golden and timeless, where the elves of Galadriel dwell in harmony with the Malorn trees. There is Fangorn, ancient and dangerous, domain of the Ents, where the trees themselves walk and wage war. There is the old forest near the Shire, wild and unpredictable, where trees have long memories and unfriendly intentions toward those who would cut them down. But Mirkwood stands apart from these others. It is the forest that fell, the paradise that became prison, the green land that went dark, and in that transformation lies its deeper meaning. Tolkien was a man who loved trees with a passion that bordered on the spiritual. He mourned the felling of forests, railed against the industrialization that was consuming the English countryside of his youth. In his letters, He spoke of the tragedy of deforestation, of the willful destruction of ancient woodlands for profit and convenience. He saw in this destruction something more than mere environmental damage. He saw it as a kind of murder, the killing of living things that had stood for centuries, that connected the present to the distant past. Mirkwood represents one version of this loss, not the physical cutting down of trees, but their corruption from within, their transformation into something unnatural and hostile. It is a forest that has been poisoned by an outside force, twisted into a mockery of what it once was. And yet, crucially, it survives. Changed, scarred, diminished, but alive. This theme of corruption and endurance runs deep in Tolkien's work. It reflects his experiences in the First World War, where he witnessed the pastoral landscapes of his childhood transformed into muddy hellscapes of trenches and barbed wire. It reflects his understanding of evil not as a creative force, but as a corrupting one. Morgoth and Sauron do not create. They twist and pervert what others have made, parasites feeding on the work of the Valar and the children of Iluvatar. Mirkwood also functions as a liminal space, a threshold between worlds. In mythology and folklore, forests have always served this purpose. They are the places where the normal rules break down, where the familiar gives way to the strange, where heroes undergo transformations and face tests that will define them. To enter the forest is to leave behind the safe and ordered world and venture into the realm of the unknown. Bilbo's journey through Mirkwood serves exactly this function in The Hobbit. He enters the forest as a timid, reluctant adventurer, still longing for his comfortable hobbit hole. But the trials he faces in the darkness, the loss of the path, the attack of the spiders, the desperate rescue of his companions, transform him. He emerges from the forest having proven his worth, having discovered reserves of courage he didn't know he possessed. The darkness called forth the light within him. This is Mirkwood's gift, paradoxically. It is a testing ground, a crucible where character is forged. Those who traverse it and survive are changed by the experience, made stronger, forced to confront fears and limitations they might otherwise never have faced. The forest strips away pretense and comfort, reduces existence to its most basic elements, survive or perish. And in that brutal simplicity, truth is revealed. Tolkien understood that darkness serves a purpose in the grand design. It provides contrast against which light can be measured. It creates the necessity for courage, for sacrifice, for the kind of heroism that only emerges when everything seems lost. A world of unbroken paradise would produce no heroes, no great tales, no moments of transcendent triumph over adversity. The shadow, however much we might wish it gone, is necessary to give meaning to the light. But this philosophical understanding does not diminish the tragedy of Mirkwood's fall. Tolkien never glorifies evil or suggests that the suffering it causes is somehow acceptable because it serves a higher purpose. The corruption of the forest is an evil, full stop. The creatures twisted into monsters, the beauty destroyed, the centuries of fear and death, these are genuine losses, genuine sorrows. That good might eventually emerge from evil does not make the evil any less terrible. What Mirkwood demonstrates is not the acceptability of evil, but the resilience of good. The forest's eventual healing, incomplete though it may be, shows that corruption need not be permanent, that life possesses an inherent strength that can overcome even the deepest wounds. This is a source of hope, not a justification for the wounds themselves. The forest also represents the deep time that fascinated Tolkien throughout his life. He was a philologist, a student of languages and their evolution over centuries and millennia. He understood in his bones that the world was ancient, that human civilization was a brief flicker in the vast span of geological and ecological time. Mirkwood exists on this scale. Its corruption lasted 1,000 years, a span that would encompass the entire history of many human civilizations, but which is merely a chapter in the forest's existence. The trees of Mirkwood remember ages before the shadow came. They will, presumably, persist for ages after it finally passes. They root themselves in deep time, connecting the present moment to the distant past and the far future. To walk among such trees is to feel the weight of that time, to understand oneself as part of a continuity that extends far beyond individual existence. This is why the forest feels so alive in Tolkien's writing, because he conceived of it not as backdrop or setting, but as a character with its own history, its own wounds, its own trajectory through time. Mirkwood has agency in a way that few fantasy locations do. It is not simply a place where things happen. It is a participant in events, shaping outcomes through its very nature. The symbolism extends even to the name itself. Mirkwood appears in Germanic mythology, in the Poetic Edda and other sources, as Mirkwood, a dark forest at the edge of the known world, a boundary between civilization and chaos. Tolkien borrowed the name deliberately, tapping into these ancient associations, imbuing his forest with resonances that would feel familiar even to readers who had never heard of the Eddas. The name itself carries weight, suggests depth, invokes archetypes buried deep in the Western imagination. And what of the way forward? If Mirkwood is a symbol of corruption and endurance, what does it tell us about our own relationship with nature, with evil, with the possibility of redemption? Perhaps this, that damage once done, leaves permanent marks. That actions have consequences that extend far beyond their immediate moment. That poisoning a river or corrupting a forest or committing any act of wanton destruction creates wounds that will require centuries to heal, if they heal at all. But also, that healing is possible. That life is resilient. That even the deepest darkness can be pushed back, that the work of restoration, though long and difficult, is worth attempting. That vigilance and care and the willingness to fight for what is good can make a difference, even when victory seems impossibly distant. Mirkwood does not offer easy answers. It does not promise that everything destroyed will be restored, that every wrong will be righted. It is more honest than that, more true to the complexity of existence. It shows us a world where evil has real power, where good must struggle and sacrifice, where victory is measured not in the complete defeat of darkness, but in survival, in endurance, in the refusal to surrender. And in this, perhaps, it offers more genuine hope than any simple tale of good triumphing over evil ever could. Because we live in a world where evil persists, where injustice continues, where the forests, literal and metaphorical, continue to fall. We need stories that acknowledge this reality while still insisting that resistance matters, that the fight is worth waging even when complete victory is impossible. Mirkwood is such a story. It invites us to walk its shadowed paths, to face its horrors, to witness its slow recovery. And in doing so, it teaches us something about our own capacity to endure, to hope, to continue moving forward even when the darkness presses close on every side. The forest stands as testament to what was lost and what persists. It reminds us that we are part of a story much larger than ourselves, that our actions ripple forward through time in ways we cannot fully predict or control, that the choices we make about how we treat the natural world and each other carry consequences that will echo long after we are gone. And if you listen closely, the forest still whispers the tales of ages past, tales of beauty and corruption, of suffering and survival, of darkness fallen and light slowly returning. It whispers them not as history, but as warning and promise both. Warning of what can be lost if we fail in vigilance. Promise of what might be restored if we succeed. Mirkwood lives in myth and memory, in the pages of Tolkien's works, and in the imaginations of millions who have read them. It has become part of our collective cultural landscape, a reference point, a symbol that carries meaning beyond its fictional origin. When we speak of places of darkness, of corruption threatening beauty, of the long, slow work of healing, Mirkwood provides the vocabulary, the imagery, the emotional resonance. This is the true magic of Tolkien's creation, not the spells and enchantments that populate his stories, but the way those stories have woven themselves into our consciousness, have become lenses through which we understand our own world. Mirkwood is real in the ways that matter most, as real as any myth or symbol that shapes how we think and feel and act. The forest endures in the only immortality that truly exists, in the stories we tell about it, in the meanings we draw from it, in the inspiration it provides to continue fighting for what is good and beautiful, even when the darkness seems overwhelming. And so Mirkwood remains, eternal in its way, a testament to Tolkien's genius and to the enduring power of story to illuminate truth through fiction. Stand at the edge of the forest now, in imagination if not in flesh. Feel the cool air that flows from beneath the canopy, carrying with it the scent of leaf mold and growing things, of shadow and secret. Listen to the rustling of branches overhead, a sound like whispered conversation in a language just beyond comprehension. Watch the shadows shift and dance as wind moves through the trees, creating patterns that almost seem purposeful, almost seem aware. This is Mirkwood eternal, not as it was in the elder days when it was called Greenwood the Great, not as it became during its dark age when shadow ruled and corruption spread, but as it exists now in the timeless realm of story and imagination. It is all versions of itself at once, paradise and prison, place of beauty and source of terror, ancient guardian and wounded survivor. The forest breathes. You can feel it if you stand quiet and still enough, the slow inhalation and exhalation of a living entity vast beyond human comprehension. Trees drawing in carbon and breathing out oxygen, roots pulling water from the deep earth, leaves rustling in their millions to create a collective sound like the breathing of some enormous beast. The forest is alive in ways that transcend individual trees and plants and creatures. It is an ecosystem, a web of interdependence so complex that no single mind could fully grasp it. And perhaps it is something more. Perhaps it has achieved a kind of collective consciousness, an awareness born from the communion of countless living things. The elves believe this to be true. They have always known that the forest is aware, that it watches and remembers, that it responds to those who enter with respect or contempt accordingly. They have spent ages learning its language, reading the signs it provides, the way certain trees lean, the patterns of moss growth, the behavior of birds and beasts. They are fluent in the forest's vocabulary where others see only random wilderness. But even the elves, with all their centuries of accumulated wisdom, do not know all the forest's secrets. There are places they have never explored, trees so ancient that they predate the awakening of the firstborn, hollows that descend into unmapped depths. The forest keeps its own counsel, reveals only what it chooses, withholds the rest in patient silence. What stories could those oldest trees tell if they chose to speak in words rather than rustling leaves? They stood when Middle-earth was young, when the shape of the world was different, when powers walked abroad that have since passed into legend or faded into nothing. They witnessed the coming of elves and men, the wars of gods and demons, the rise and fall of kingdoms uncounted. They endured ages of ice and ages of fire, of peace and of war, always remaining, always watching with their blind yet all-seeing awareness. They remember Greenwood the Great in its glory. They remember the first shadow that crept across the land. They remember every life lost beneath their boughs, every act of courage and every moment of terror. They remember because that is what trees do. They keep the records in their rings, in their roots, in the very substance of their wood. To cut down an ancient tree is to destroy a library, to silence a witness to history. But these trees of Mirkwood stand still, uncut, bearing their testimony in silence. They have survived axes and fires, storms and blights. They have outlasted kingdoms and outlived entire peoples. And they will continue, long after the current age has passed into legend, long after the stories told about them have been forgotten and must be discovered anew by scholars of future ages. This is what makes the forest eternal, not any immunity to harm or change, but simple, stubborn persistence. The ability to endure beyond all reasonable expectation, to continue existing when any sensible entity would have surrendered to entropy. The forest does not fight against time. It encompasses time, makes it part of itself, incorporates even destruction and decay into the endless cycle of growth and renewal. A tree falls, ancient beyond measure, brought down at last by disease or storm. Its fall tears a gap in the canopy, letting sunlight reach the forest floor for the first time in centuries. And immediately, seeds begin to germinate, young trees racing upward to claim that space, to fill the gap, to continue the story. The fallen tree does not vanish. It lies where it fell, slowly decomposing, feeding fungi and insects, returning its accumulated substance to the soil to nourish the next generation. Death feeding life, feeding death in the eternal circle. The forest is both cemetery and nursery, both archive and laboratory. It contains everything that has ever been, continues everything that is, and holds the seeds of everything that will be. Past, present, and future coexist beneath its branches, impossible to fully separate or distinguish. And the magic, the magic that lingers here is not the flashy sorcery of wizards, not the kind that announces itself with thunder and lightning. It is the quieter magic of life itself, the improbable alchemy that transforms sunlight and water and minerals into living wood, into flowers and fruit, into the staggering diversity of forms that populate every niche and fill every space. This magic predates all conscious beings, operates according to laws that no artificer has ever fully understood or successfully replicated. The elves work with this magic rather than against it. They shape growing things with song and patience, coaxing plants into forms that serve elven purposes while still remaining true to their essential nature. It is collaboration, not domination, a partnership between consciousness and the unconscious processes of life. This is why elven works harmonize with nature rather than conquering it, why their dwellings feel like natural extensions of the forest rather than impositions upon it. But even abandoned by elves, even corrupted by shadow, even left entirely to its own devices, the forest would continue. It needs no tenders, no protectors, no conscious guidance. It is self-sustaining, self-renewing, operating according to principles established in the music of the Aenir at the world's creation. The forest will outlast everyone and everything. Long after the last elf has sailed west, after men have risen to dominance, and then perhaps fallen again, after the age has turned and turned again, the forest will remain. This is simultaneously humbling and inspiring. Humbling because it reminds us of our own brevity, our brief flicker of awareness in the vast span of existence. Inspiring because it demonstrates that some things do endure, that continuity is possible, that despite all the destruction and chaos and change, the fundamental patterns persist. Walk deeper now, in this imagining, further beneath the canopy where the light grows dim and the air grows cool. Feel the springiness of the forest floor beneath your feet, centuries of leaf fall creating a carpet that cushions each step. Notice how sound behaves differently here, some noises muffled, others amplified, creating an acoustic environment unlike any open space. The forest surrounds you, encloses you, and if you allow yourself to truly feel it, you understand that you are not separate from this place but part of it, another organism moving through the great living system. The trees press close, not threatening but present. Their bark is textured, complex, hosting communities of lichen and moss. Their branches reach overhead in patterns of mathematical complexity, fractals of growth playing out across multiple scales. Everything here is connected to everything else, roots intertwining beneath the soil, mycorrhizal networks allowing trees to share resources and information, predator and prey locked in their ancient dances, decomposers breaking down what others leave behind. You are walking through a web of relationships so intricate that even a lifetime of study could not fully map it. And this is just one forest, one ecosystem among millions. The complexity is staggering, beautiful, overwhelming. It induces a kind of awe that is almost religious in character, the recognition of something far greater than oneself, something that commands respect and wonder. This is what Tolkien understood and tried to capture in his writing. Not just the physical reality of forests, but their spiritual significance, their role as places where the divine and the earthly meet. In many cultures, forests are sacred spaces, dwelling places of gods and spirits, sites where the veil between worlds grows thin. Tolkien, steeped in these mythological traditions, recognized that forests carry power beyond the merely ecological. Mirkwood, even corrupted, even fallen, retains this sacred quality. It is a temple profaned but not destroyed, a holy place awaiting restoration. The shadow could twist it, but not fundamentally alter its essential nature. Beneath the corruption, the forest remained itself, waiting with the patience of deep time for the darkness to pass and the healing to begin. And now, as we reach the end of this journey through shadow and story, what remains to be said? What final truth can Mirkwood reveal? Perhaps simply this, that the darkness is real and terrible, but it is not eternal. That corruption can spread far and sink deep, but it cannot wholly destroy what is essentially good. That evil has power, yes, but life has a power of its own, subtler, slower, but ultimately more fundamental and more enduring. The forest will outlast its enemies. It will outlast its allies. It will outlast memory itself, standing as it has always stood, rooted in the earth, reaching toward the sky, maintaining the ancient patterns through all changes and chances. Mirkwood is not merely a setting in a fantasy novel. It is an idea, a symbol, a truth expressed in the language of myth. It speaks to something deep within us, our connection to the natural world, our fear of corruption and loss, our hope for restoration and renewal. It reminds us that we are part of something larger and older than human civilization, that our species is a late arrival in a story that has been unfolding for billions of years and will continue long after we are gone. But it also reminds us that we have a role to play in that story, that our choices matter, that we can be forces for healing or for further harm, that the future is not fixed but shaped by the actions of every being, great and small. The elves chose to stay and fight for their forest rather than abandoning it to darkness. That choice made all the difference. So too with us. We face our own Mirkwoods, places and systems corrupted by greed or hatred or simple neglect, wounds in the world that cry out for healing. We can choose to turn away, to say that the task is too large, the damage too deep, the effort too costly. Or we can choose to stay, to fight, to do what we can with what we have, trusting that small actions accumulate, that persistence matters, that the arc of time bends toward healing if we are willing to help bend it. The forest teaches patience. It teaches perspective. It teaches that meaningful change operates on scales larger than individual lifetimes, but that this does not make individual actions meaningless. Every tree that grows, every seed that germinates, every act of creation or preservation adds to the whole, shifts the balance infinitesimally but genuinely toward life. And in the end, life persists, always. It finds a way, exploits every opportunity, adapts to every challenge. You cannot kill life. You can only kill individual lives. The force itself, the principle, the endless creative surge that has been expressing itself through ever more complex forms since the first replicating molecules formed in primordial seas, that cannot be stopped by any power in the universe. This is the ultimate truth of Mirkwood, the secret it whispers to those patient enough to listen. That life endures, that forests return, that spring follows winter as surely as breath follows breath. The darkness came, the darkness will come again, but the light persists through all darkenings, waiting for its moment to shine forth renewed. Mirkwood endures, a forest of secrets, shadows, and stories yet untold. It stands at the edge of imagination, inviting us to enter, to explore, to learn what truths hide in the green darkness. It offers no promises of safety, no guarantee that all will end well. But it offers something perhaps more valuable, the opportunity to participate in something timeless, to walk paths that connect us to everyone who has ever stood beneath trees and felt the stirring of something ancient and holy. The forest waits. It always waits, patient as stone, eternal as the turning of seasons. It will be there when you are ready to enter, ready to face what mysteries and terrors and beauties it holds. It will test you and teach you, and if you survive the trials, transform you. And when you emerge, if you emerge, you will carry the forest with you. In memories and dreams, in lessons learned, in the knowledge that you have touched something older and wiser and more enduring than yourself. You will carry it in your bones, in your blood, in the rhythm of your breathing that matches the rhythm of the forest's eternal respiration. This is Mirkwood's final gift, the awareness of connection, of being part of the great web of existence that extends in all directions through space and time. You are not separate. You are not alone. You are a thread in the vast tapestry, brief but essential, your pattern interwoven with all others. The trees stand witness. The shadows dance. The eternal forest breathes. And the story continues, as it has continued for ages beyond counting, as it will continue for ages yet to come. Mirkwood endures. And so, if we are wise and brave and fortunate, do we. Dear listener, this story ends, but many await. Subscribe so no tale escapes you.